Hi, welcome. My name is Joanne and welcome to today's Challah-cast. This week we are in the Parsha Vayishlach. And in this Parsha, as we know, a lot has happened up till now, and Jacob is going to become Israel. His name changes to Israel. All the 12 tribes, all the 12 sons, and also, of course, one daughter also have been born by the end of this Parsha. Some sadness as Rachel dies in childbirth. But her son Benjamin is born healthy, and he gets a change of name as well. Just even before he's born, Jacob chooses to change his name from Ben-Oni, which was Rachel's choice, to Benjamin. So we have a couple of name changes in this Parsha, and the big name change, of course, is Jacob, who becomes Israel. And we know that Jacob became Israel not without struggle. He had a lot of struggle, as we all know, from the time he was in the womb with his twin brother Esau. They were kicking and they were battling with each other and wrestling with each other. In between, there was also a lot as well, as we know, with the birthright and with the blessings and with his wives, and having to work for 7 years, another 7 years for Rachel. His struggles did not stop since we met Jacob, really. And of course there was deceit and a lot of things that were happening in there that we cannot judge with our minds, but we have to know that this is God working to make his nation of Israel. We meet God as our creator, who creates everything out of nothing. He's forming constantly. He's forming and forming until he gives us all the amazing world that we live in and everything created that he prepared for us to enter into. And then we, the people, entered in on day 6, after even the animals, just before the 7th day of rest of Shabbat. It's such a beautiful story of creation, and how God put us in just the day before. What he was going to give us to do was to rest with him, was to worship him, was to enjoy him and delight with him. So the whole story of creation goes like that. But of course, already soon, we know what happens with Adam and Eve and the flood and everything that comes. But then at last, God is creating his nation from Abraham, which we've been looking at the past few weeks. And everything that God does, of course, is for his purposes. And every single thing, every incident in these Parsha, I want to point out, leading up to what we're reading now, every single thing in the Parsha is all God's formation and creation. He's creating his nation. So all the things that had to happen, the deceit and the birthright and the scenes with the stew and Jacob dressing up in his brother's clothing, and all the things that had to happen because this is what's in our Torah. This is what's here. This is what God, this is our God who's creating a nation of holy priests for himself. So finally, at last, in the scene here, Jacob wrestles all night until the daybreak with the angel, and who, said to, well, I'm not going to really go into all the details of who the angel was. So he wrestles with a man, or he wrestles with the angel until daybreak. There's one line I wanted to say here when he finally gets his name changed. So right here in Genesis 32, line 29, he says, after the wrestling, he asks Jacob his name, and Jacob says Jacob, and then he says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but rather Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have overcome. So that's a line I want to look at today. And before we make our Challah, I want to do something. I want to bring attention to us, as we just talked about as the 6 days of creation were made, and then we enter into this amazing day of Shabbat. So before we make the Challah and before we enter into the Shabbat, the whole week is sort of, we relive the creation every week in a way with when you really start to observe Shabbat, and you start to anticipate the Shabbat and entering into Shabbat and the special time that God has given us, this special time that God has given us. And as you start to, I call it, live on God's time or enter into God's time, you really start to feel time approaching. You start to feel, it's Friday morning when I'm doing this filming, so I'm rushed. You start to feel it's that time that you remember. Shabbat is a memorial of the work of creation, as well as as well as our time, of course, to rest with him and to delight in him and worship him. And we're always worshiping him, but Shabbat is this time that connects with his creation. And then we also remember everything else all the things he did, all his wondrous deeds. And of course, so today, my particular angle here with the Challah-cast, which I'm doing before the Shabbat, is that to reflect on the week's Parsha. So now that we're in this Parsha with the forming of Israel, what I was going to do is show how we make 12 strands of the challah, and how those 12 strands can be seen to represent the 12 tribes of Israel when we put them together into two challah of 12. Two 6-strand challahs, which would be like the 12, made up of the 12 tribes. Or I think I'm going to still put it in. I'm really going with the spirit of how these Challah-casts are flying, because this idea, what I'm doing right now, is really new. It just started when I was brushing my teeth this morning. I heard, okay, I've got to wrestle with God. I've got to wrestle with my evil inclination, my yitzar hara. Yitzar hara is the Hebrew word. I hope I got that right. Yitzar hara. I have to wrestle with mine before I make that challah. Because before we come into Shabbat, or before we come into anything that we do with our intention of our heart to God, as we know, we want to have a clean heart for Him. When we make a challah, there's a heart intent when we make a challah. We want to be. We talked about Sarah a few weeks ago, and how her divine light glowed from the challah. So we don't really want to come in we could. I mean, I'm not saying what you have to do or what you can't do. I mean, you might come into Shabbat making your challah and just, take out your week on the challah dough and be like, just punch it out and all that kind of stuff. And so I'll get it all out on my challah dough before I enter Shabbat. If we have a really hectic week, you could think of it that way. But I'm going to put that aside. And again, remember how Sarah, what she put into her challah, she put in that divine connection with God as she made her challah. So when we come, and again, this could relate to something else that you might be doing in your life. If you're not, everyone who watches this, I know, is not making challah tonight. But so before we make the challah, I wanted to punch out our week, or things that punch out our evil inclination. I want to punch it out before we make our challah. So that's my theme today, is our preparation for going into making the challah, and we're going to be punching out our evil inclinations. Jacob had, there were all different kinds of things that they had to go through, the brothers. There was some things that have not gotten resolved. There's jealousies, and there was human desire struggles, and of course Esau wanted the soup more than the birthright. He was willing to go with his flesh to just take that soup and not the birthright. And Jacob did the deception, but Jacob knew that there was something bigger in the spirit that he needed. Even though he didn't completely understand it at first, he knew that this was what he was supposed to have. Even though he might have taken it too early, we don't know anything. We don't know about that, but that's what he was acting more on, something he knew in his spiritual goals and destiny. And Esau was going with his flesh, and that's what he continually did. He continually went with his flesh, and we constantly have that battle as well, to struggle with our desires. And so I just had this insight, this inspiration. It was actually a Holy Spirit inspiration. Basically, what I want to teach you to do is to prepare your heart for making your challah. And of course, like I said, one of them is, a main one is in prayer and in confession. That's how we prepare our hearts. But another one is just something fun that I wanted to show you today that I have learned from Pastor Lynn Hayden, my worship dance instructor. Actually, making our challah, we can have that divine, just really think, there is no one but you, Lord. There is no one but you when we make our challah. So we can punch out the things that are maybe in our fleshly hearts, or our things in our week that maybe we didn't do so good on, or as well as just the things in the spirit that are maybe wanting to come up against us as we prepare to enter into time with God. Okay, so you ready? Stomach tight, tailbone in, and you can stand a little bit soft. Make your knees soft, and let's do one round. Well, let's start with our hands like this. Punch, 2, 3, 4. Punch, 2, 3, 4. Hook, 2, 3, 4, and a hook, 2, 3, 4, and cut, 2, 3, 4, and cut, 2, 3, 4, and jab, 2, 3, 4, and jab, 2, 3, 4, and kick, 2. Don't forget to look behind you for kick, 2, kick, kick, bob, 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 bob. Okay, so you can do variations of that with the punching and the hook and the cut and the jab, and let's each do our wrestling. So it's very important that each of us do our wrestling, and each of us ask the Lord to clean out our hearts, so that each one of us have our responsibility and our part in being His nation of holy priesthood. And now, if you're ready, we can start to make our challah. And experience shalom as we prepare our challah for this week's Shabbat. And I'll pray for you, the one who's watching. May the peace of God that goes beyond all understanding be with you this Shabbat, and guard your hearts and minds in Messiah Yeshua. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord be gracious to you and shine His face upon you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. God bless you, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so friends, I'm just adding this little last scene. A little scene. You saw that we had the 2 challahs of 12 strands, but I also made a little challah like this. There was a little more out of the dough. So out of one dough came the 2 challahs that you just saw in the last picture, the 2 challahs, and representing the 12 tribes. And then this little one, this challah, additional one, came also from the same dough. So I like that. And I see it today as being like Dinah, their sister of the sister, Dinah, who was born to Leah. And Dinah had a scene, as you know, where she was defiled in Shechem, and the 2 brothers. So this challah, I just wanted to cover with, this is Shimeon's name and Levi, and those are the 2 who revenged her in this Parsha in Shechem. And that's just something I wanted to do, just to honor her. And as well as these flowers, I got 12 carnations to represent the formation of Israel with the 12 tribes that we're reading about this week. So God bless you, everybody, and thank you so much for watching, and Shabbat Shalom.